Hey there, I'm Yankel, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about pounding chicken. It's basically based on a blog post I wrote a long time ago about my experience with schnitzel and how formative it was. So I'm going to share with you my basic schnitzel recipe, but what I'm actually doing today is called katsu, which is the Asian version, because I'm going to use panko instead of regular breadcrumbs. It's basically chicken breast, sometimes other meats, but primarily chicken breast pounded really thin and then breaded in flour, egg, and then some kind of breadcrumb, and then fried. When it comes to flattening proteins, we thin them out so that they cook really fast. You'll find it in cuisines where there was a shortage of cooking fuel. That's often the result of climate and region, and so they needed things to cook quickly. Pounding them thin was one way to do that. Another reason is tenderizing, something that might otherwise be tough. In this case, it's chicken breast, obviously, it's already very tender. When we flatten it out, it's gonna cook so fast, and then you also get this really nice crispy texture, and you get a lot of surface area, which is great if you wanna add sauces or you wanna turn it into sandwiches. So really you get all these different benefits, but primarily it's cooking quickly. I'm gonna show you the easiest way to do it and my method, which obviously is my method. First of all, when it comes to pounding chicken, you have all sorts of tools that are invented for it. This was not invented for it. This is just a rubber mallet. But this is a tenderizer. I never use a tenderizer because I feel like it just breaks up the meat too much. This is a tenderizer slash mallet with a flat side. These are okay, but I find that it directs too much force into one specific area. So basically what I use are a heavy bottom frying pan and my trusty rolling pin. Now, I want to minimize the mess as much as possible, which is where my ziplock bag comes into play. So I'm going to take my chicken breast. Now what I'm looking for is basically 1/4 of an inch thick all the way across. I want it to be even, I want it to cook in the pan, I don't want to have to put it back into the oven, and I want it to all cook at the same time. So I've got it in my Ziploc bag. First thing I'm going to do, take my heavy bottom frying pan and basically give it a good whack. Just to start that flattening process out. Then I take my rolling pin and I basically get even distribution of that flat surface all the way across. So I'll start in the middle and move in one direction, and then back to the middle, other direction, turn it, same thing going both ways. And I love getting these uneven edges because those get really nice and crusty when you fry them. There we have, nice and thin, fairly even. And I like to do this all in stages so I keep everything clean. So basically what I'm gonna do is flatten out my chicken breasts, and then I'll create my breading station. We'll get them breaded, and then we'll move on to frying. All right, I'm gonna wash my hands, we'll move on to breading. When it comes to breading the chicken, there are a couple of tips that I like to always have in mind. So number one is I'm going to season my flour so that I have a little salt and pepper close to the meat itself. I am using a seasoned panko today just because that's what I picked up. So there's gonna be a little extra seasoning there, but salt and pepper in the flour adds a little bit of extra flavor. Now the second thing that I like to do is not put all my breadcrumbs in one basket. And basically that's because I'm going from egg to breadcrumb. I'm liable to take some extra egg with me and that'll clump up the breadcrumbs. So I want to use as little as possible, so I waste as little as possible, and then I'll replenish it as needed. So the first thing we're gonna do is give our seasoned flour a little stir. We're gonna go from our chicken right into our flour, and just a light coating. Basically the point of the flour is to help the egg adhere to the surface. A little bit of flour. We don't want a lot of flour, it's just a light coating, so we'll shake it off before we get into the egg and just make sure that every inch of that surface is covered. Great. Now into the egg. At this point I switch to tongs just to kind of keep my hands clean so that I can keep going back to the chicken and not have to wash my hands in between each piece. And I'm just gonna flip that over, make sure it's nicely coated on all sides. And then we're going right into our breadcrumbs, and I'm just gonna let it drip in the egg for a second and try and lay it flat right away. And then basically what I'm gonna do is just scoop some breadcrumbs on top, give that a little sprinkle. We'll flip it over in just a sec, but I like to make sure that all the edges are coated as well. And I'm gonna take my tongs, lift it up, give it a shake, flip it over, make sure it's nicely covered on all sides. And once I have good coverage, I'll put it down and just press it very lightly to make sure it really has a nice coating. Okay, and then the last piece of this is I have basically some wax paper, some butcher paper, and that'll keep it from sticking to the other pieces. It'll also keep it from sticking to the bottom of the pan. So if I'm making several pieces at once, I can actually just stack them up here. So we'll go right onto that. So that's it for breading, and we're gonna move on to pan frying. Now for pan frying our katsu slash schnitzel slash whatever you wanna call it, I'm gonna go with medium-high heat. I want my oil temperature to be above 300, right around 350 is a great temperature for frying. I'm not gonna use a thermometer. I'm actually just gonna use that little extra scrap that fell off to be my tester. And I'm using a combination of ghee and olive oil. Love the flavor of olive oil, love the flavor of ghee. Ghee is pretty expensive, so I'm gonna go half and half because I think it matches really well. You can use any oil you like when it comes to frying, but just make sure that there is a majority of high temperature oil in there so that it doesn't scorch when you're frying. Now I want enough oil to cover the bottom of the pan nicely, plus about 1/4 of an inch. So it's not a complete deep fry because it's not fully immersed. We're frying one side then the other, but we want it to come up around the edges a little bit. Once the oil starts to move around, obviously the ghee is gonna melt into the oil. We know we're on our way to a good heat temperature. And basically once the ghee is completely melted, I'm gonna wait about a minute and then I'm gonna put a little tester piece in there. You can even just throw a couple of breadcrumbs in there. The water trick, just a little water spatter, that'll let you know if you're on track or not. Then you wanna wait just a couple more seconds because we don't want the temperature to drop drastically. We want a good hot temperature so that the oil doesn't make the breadcrumbs soggy, that it starts cooking right away. The only thing we don't want to happen is we don't want the oil to get too hot because we need the chicken to cook internally while it's browning on the outside. And if it gets too hot, it's gonna brown the outside and the inside will still be raw, at which point you probably wanna take it out of the pan and finish it in the oven, which is fine. But I like to have everything happen nicely and evenly. So I think we're right on track. You can hear that little foaming sound. I'm ready to go in. So we're gonna go right down there in the middle, and you can actually see how the oil is separating in the pan. That definitely means we are right on track. Beautiful. It cooks pretty quickly, which is obviously part of the point of pounding it flat. So we're gonna watch it very carefully, not gonna walk away. It's gonna take about 2 to 3 minutes on each side, and then it's done. The edges are gonna start to brown very gently. If you need to, you can always lower the temperature just a bit. So now that I know I have good temperature in the pan, I'll drop it maybe 1 click on your stove, just so it cooks a little bit more slowly. And you can see we're getting, oh, beautiful browning happening. All right. I think we're ready for a flip. I love using farm fresh eggs because you get really nice yellowish hue to the fried surface. So the only other thing I'm gonna do right now is I'm actually gonna baste the surface, and this is a optional trick that just helps it cook a little bit faster. So I'm actually just gonna use my tongs and baste the surface of the other side just to kind of keep that cooking happening. About a minute and a half on the other side before we check it, and then we may have to flip it a couple more times for it to finish because we don't want it to burn or get much darker than it already is. Now I am using a non-stick pan. You can use a cast iron pan, you can use a stainless steel pan, you can use a Dutch oven. All those work really well. If you're using a non-stick pan, and metal tongs. Just be careful not to scrape the surface because it can ruin the non-stick quality. I think that one's done. It looks absolutely perfect, that beautiful golden color. We're gonna go right onto a resting rack. If you have a wire rack, obviously that's ideal because it will let some of the oil drain. If you don't, just paper towels on a pan will work just fine. Now the beautiful thing about crusty, crispy panko coating is you can dunk a whole bunch of sauce on it and it's gonna stay crispy. So basically think about your favorite gravy. Could be tomato sauce, that'll give you that kind of Milanese, South American, Italian style. You can melt some cheese on it. You can go with beef gravy. You can go with a cream gravy with sausage in it, you know, southern chicken fried steak style. Basically anything you want to do. The other great thing is they refrigerate really well. And when you want to reheat them, you throw them in a hot oven and they'll crisp up in no time. So I'll actually make a big batch of these and I can use them on sandwiches. I can slice them up and put them on a salad. They make a great dinner portion. Pretty much everything you need all week long. They'll last all week in the fridge. You just reheat them as you need them. So that's my take on the schnitzel variety, in this case katsu. I think it's worth it every time. I just make big batches, so the time that I put in is worth what I get out of it. And gosh, will you look at that, just like beautifully cooked. It stays so moist because it cooks really quickly. Go pound something thin and then deep fry it. Or pan fry it. Or grill it. Bread it. Coat it. Either way, you're gonna win because you're cooking something delicious. I'm Yankel. See you next time.